we will now be moving on to our fiscal year 2024 to 25 CRCS training. There are 3 main goals for today's training. The first goal is to provide an overview of the fiscal year 2024 to 25 CRCS, including the Excel template updates and the supporting reports. Next, we will go through a live demonstration to understand the mechanics of the CRCS template using sample data for a mock LEA. Lastly, we will discuss next steps, which will include tips and reminders for filling out your CRCS, which will be available resources to assist in completing the template and a review of the submission package and timeline. We will start with an overview of the fiscal year 2024 to 25 CRCS. In total, there are 17 worksheets in the fiscal year 2024-25 CRCS template. The key difference between this year's CRCS and last year's template is the new tab for CYBHI fee schedule payments, which is Worksheet B1. Other than this new worksheet and some other small edits, the CRCS will look similar to last year's template. This slide will outline key updates to the fiscal year 2024 to 25 CRCS. As I mentioned, you will see some changes to the fiscal year 2024 to 25 template to account for the first year of CYBHI fee schedule program payments. The certification page now requires information on LEA participation in the CYBHI fee schedule program. Also, new fields have been added to capture CYBHI fee schedule payments for both employed and contracted staff. Next, there are some updates on the allocation statistics for fiscal year 2024 to 25. We just discussed the fact that the MER must be calculated using October 2024 enrollment data. So note that you cannot use MER information that is obtained for the SMAP program since the populations are not the same between the two programs. The DMSP is based on fiscal year 2024 to 25 RMTS results, which are not yet final and will be published after they are submitted to DHCS at the end of December. Lastly, FMAP changes reflect the end of the public health emergency and the phasing out of the COVID-19 counseling payments at 100% FMAP. Additionally, a reminder that the LEA BOP program administration withhold amount will be reconciled using the CRCS, replacing the previous fair share reconciliation process. There are 6 supporting reports available to help complete the CRCS. As you can see, there are 2 reports that are optional. All of these reports will be posted on the fiscal year 2024 to 25 CRCS webpage in January. We'll go through each report in detail so that it is clear what you'll be seeing on the supporting reports when you download these in the coming weeks. The first report is the LEA BOP Annual Reimbursement Report. This report serves as a key reference for LEAs when completing CRCS Worksheet A, specifically line AC, which represents the interim Medi-Cal reimbursement through the fiscal intermediary. LEAs can locate their NPI on this report and input the amount listed on Worksheet A, line AC. Note that this report is not considered final until summer 2026 due to the 1-year claiming timeline. If your LEA receives additional payments after the report date, DHCS will capture the total amount paid for your NPI during the audit process. The second report is the FMAP grouping percentages report, which LEAs will use when completing the allocation statistics worksheet of the CRCS. This report is also by NPI and shows the percentage of each LEA's total interim reimbursement in the various FMAP groupings. For example, the top LEA ending in 1111 had about 78% of their interim reimbursement for the Title 19 Medicaid students and 10% of their interim reimbursement for students that qualified under the ACA as Title 19 Enhanced FMAPs, and then 12% of students that qualified under the Children's Health Insurance Program known as CHIP. This LEA had no claims associated with COVID-19 counseling. For all NPIs, the total will sum to 100%. Report number 3 is the report that includes the direct medical service percentage, or DMSP, that is obtained from the RMTS results from fiscal year 2024 to 25. The LEA should locate the region that they contracted with for RMTS in fiscal year 2024 to 25 and input the DMSP into the allocation statistics worksheet of the CRCS. What you are seeing on the screen were used in last year's CRCS. The percentages for the fiscal year 2024 to 25 CRCS that is due in March will be published in January. Report 4 is the Program Administration Withhold Report, which shows how much each NPI has contributed toward program expenses in fiscal year 2024 to 25. As LEAs submit interim claims for reimbursement, 3% is withheld from payment to support program expenses. The Program Administration Withhold Report summarizes those withhold contributions for each NPI. The amount that is on this report for your LEA will be input on Worksheet A, line AA. Also, on Worksheet A, the CRCS calculates each NPI's share of the program expenses for the year on line Z. On line AB, you'll see an amount that reconciles what the NPI's share is versus what your LEA has paid for the year, and the resulting amount will be included on line AB. We'll go through this more in our walkthrough in a few moments. For now, you should simply understand what this report represents and how to use the information when you complete the CRCS. Report 5 is the first optional report that some LEAs will need to reference when completing a CRCS. If your NPI billed for transportation during fiscal year 2024 to 25 using procedure code T2003, which is used for billing one-way trips, then you will want to download this report. The LEA BOP Specialized Medical Transportation Report provides summary information on the number of specialized medical transportation trips billed by your LEA, as well as the total reimbursement amount. This report can be useful to determine the one-way trip ratio, which is an allocation factor that is used to apportion specialized transportation costs. The one-way trips are representative of a unit of service in the second column shown on this slide. Some LEAs track this information electronically, and if that is the case for your LEA, you do not need to use this report. You can also use your LEA's own report to document the number of trips provided to Medicaid students who have transportation in the IEP. The total number of one-way trips are shown in the second column on the table here, and those can be added to the CRCS Allocation Statistics Worksheet, specifically Section 4, which relates to transportation allocation. Note that if your LEA provided specialized medical transportation during the fiscal year, but 11 or fewer one-way trips were paid, the data has been redacted on this report. You can see an example of this scenario in the last row on the table. If this is the case for your MPI, you will need to email DHCS at the email listed on the report, and they will provide your information separately in a secure manner. Finally, the last report is the CYBHI fee schedule payments report. This report is also optional and will only include information for MPIs that were paid under the CYBHI fee schedule program for services rendered in fiscal year 2024 to 25. This report includes the billing provider NPI, which is the LEA's NPI in the first column, followed by the rendering practitioner NPI number, name, and the total payments for that practitioner. You should see detail for all rendering practitioners that are employees, as well as any embedded contractors associated with your LEA's NPI. Remember that you only need to capture the CYBHI fee schedule payments on the CRCS if the practitioner's costs are reported on the CRCS. The CYBHI fee schedule payments reports will not be final when it is published to the LEA Bob website in January, since the CYBHI participating providers still have time to bill claims from fiscal year 2024 to 25. Any additional payments received after the report date will be finalized during the CRCS audit. As a reminder, if your LEA did not bill for the CYBHI fee schedule program are services rendered in fiscal year 2024 to 25, you do not need to worry about the CYBHI payments on this CRCS. If your LEA is one of the LEAs, which is less than 50 that did bill for fiscal year 2024 to 25 services, Arna will be walking through how to use this report in our mock LEA demonstration, which is coming up next.
Thank you, Dana. I am going to share my screen so that we can do a walkthrough of a mocked CRCS. Okay, so I'm going to be walking through the CRCS draft at this point. It's kind of going through final review, but we wanted to do something a little different than we've done in the past and actually kind of do a live demo. So I'll be entering some data as we go and kind of explaining the worksheets as we go. So this first worksheet, it is in blue here on the tab name. This is not a CRCS worksheet. This is a worksheet that compiles all the assumptions that we're going to use. And we just included it for the sake of completeness in the event that this file gets posted. But you're going to see the assumptions on each worksheet as we go. So don't worry about this. It's just in here for the sake of being complete. But as we go through, you'll see all of the assumptions that we're going to use for every worksheet. So we're going to start with the certification tab and just work our way through the 17 tabs that are in the CRCS. And as you've heard this morning or this afternoon, most of the worksheets look very similar. So I'm going to try to highlight the differences for you. And as I said, we'll just go through and do some of the data input so you can see how the information flows between the various worksheets here. So for the sake of time, I did include the LEA identifying information here. We're using a fictitious LEA called Ocean Mist Unified with a Nancy Drew theme throughout for all of you book enthusiasts. And that is something that you'll complete right away when you get your CRCS. So you're just going to need to make sure that you include the name, the contact person who can be contacted about the report if there are questions, the NPI, obviously very critical piece, email, address, and not as much, but please include it as best you can. We realize some people don't have fax machines anymore, so you can leave that blank if you need to. That won't flag anything on the intake process. And then you're going to see question and parts 2, 3, and 4. So part 2 is not new. In our case for this Ocean Mist Unified, they're not going to be putting costs on their CRCS in a case where they didn't submit any interim claims. But if that is your LEA and you do plan to include costs on the CRCS when you did not submit interim claims, but you have the supporting documentation that you need to prove that a LEA BOP covered service was provided, then you would mark that yes, just to flag that information. In our case, we're not going to be doing that. These practitioners have all submitted claims through the fiscal intermediary. So we'll just put no there. The next piece, number 3, is a new element, and this is related to the CYBHI fee schedule program. And as you've heard, this is the first year that the CRCS will incorporate those payments. So if you did receive payments through the fee schedule for services provided during 24-25, then you're going to mark yes. And if you did not, then you'll just put no there. Just it's a flag column entry there. And then this is the certification. So this looks unchanged from prior years. This is basically the person who is signing the CRCS needs to read this and certify that they are submitting accurate information for the LEA. And then when we're done today, we will have an overpayment or underpayment in this gray cell here. And then the person who is signing this statement is going to need to put their identifying information here, and we will go through the process of the electronic certification form at the end today, just to kind of close the loop on that. But there is an electronic certification that will accompany your Excel template. And for the purposes of today's walkthrough, we are going to say that this is not a billing consortium. So if you do participate in a billing consortium, you will obviously select yes here in this input area, and then you'll put the LEAs that participate in your consortium and their CDS code. So that is it for the first worksheet. And we'll come back to this after we've completed the data so we can see that overpayment, underpayment. So we're going to start by looking at the allocation statistics worksheet. And this is how you're going to know that these are the assumptions we're using. And obviously your LEA will look different than this. These are all very nice, pretty round numbers to make it easy for the walkthrough, but you will go ahead and input your LEA's information. So the first thing that you're going to input is the indirect cost rate. For your reference, we do have a cell reference here, so that's located in B7 right here. And I'm just going to drop in 10%. So we're going to say Ocean Mist has a 10% indirect cost rate. I have found that by looking at the CDE indirect cost rate link that is in the instructions of the CRCS and located that LEA and just pulled their 24-25 rate. So we'll drop that in there. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to input the percentage of claims that broke out into the various funding groups. So not to get too detailed, but the beneficiaries, the students that are Medi-Cal members, are funded through different funding streams. So there is a Title 19 Medicaid funding stream that's a very traditional Medicaid. Most of the claims will probably fall into this group. There's an ACA enhanced rate, there's a CHIP rate, which is Title 21, and then we have COVID-19 counseling that did get a higher FMAP. It got 100% FMAP for part of the year. We haven't seen any claims come through for COVID-19, so what we're going to do today is we are going to assume that 70% of our claims were Title 19 Medicaid, that 20% were Title 19 enhanced ACA students, and then 10% are going to be CHIP students or Title 21. And this is again taken right from the report that you're going to download on the website that is called FMAP funding grouping percentages or something very similar to that. You will see it also in the instructions. So just keep an eye on the website. That's where you're going to get this information here. And we're going to just put in 0% for COVID-19 since there have not been any claims. The total of this always has to equal 100. So just make sure when you do your CRCS that this is 100%. If it's not, then that's something that is a problem. The report will always total 100%. So just go back and make sure that you got the right percentages for your data input. Okay, the next input is right here in B14, and this is where we're going to input the RMTS percentage, the direct medical service percentage for the time study. And we're just going to use 50% because it's nice and easy, and it'll allow us to kind of follow the calculations. This percent, again, will get posted on the LEA BOP CRCS webpage. And you just pick the region that your LEA contracts with, and you're just going to pull the percentage right from that report and drop it in. And then we have two ratios that we are going to be calculating here. The first one is the Medi-Cal enrollment ratio, or the MER. And I had selected a very simple 50% ratio. So I said we had 500 students that were eligible and enrolled for Medicaid, and we had 1,000 students at Ocean Mist Unified School District, and that gave us a 50% MER. And then lastly, we are going to say that this LEA does bill for transportation. And so we are going to input, again, pretty round numbers here. We chose 75 trips, one-way trips were provided. That would be for Medicaid students that have transportation in their IEP or IFSP, and our total was 250. So that's going to give us, I think it's a 30%. Yes, a 30% specialized Medi-Cal transportation one-way trip ratio. So now that we have that done, this is kind of the easy worksheet. I like this one because it's really just kind of gathering information and inputting data. Now that we have that done, we are going to go over to worksheet A. We're not going to spend a lot of time here yet. We'll come back here at the end because worksheet A is the worksheet that gathers all of the information that you're going to be inputting, and it will calculate the overpayment or underpayment. But I do want to show you that that information that we just included is now flowing into worksheet A. So our indirect cost rate of 10% is here, our DMSP of 50% is here, our MER is here, and our percentage of claims. So everything got pulled in correctly. Anything that's gray it's going to be locked. You don't have to worry about it. Those are fields that pull from other worksheets. But you will see that once you start entering data in the allocation statistics page, that it will just roll right up to worksheet A. Okay, so now we're going to start with data entry on practitioners, and we are going to assume that we have 3 practitioners for this LEA. We have a psychologist, a nurse, and an SLP. And I will talk as I'm inputting because we have to input for 4 quarters. So we're going to assume that our psychologist has $30,000 for this quarter in salary, $5,000 in benefits, and we are going to go ahead and say they are federally funded for a portion of their costs, and it's $5,000. So you can enter all this. It's all positive entries, so don't worry about like netting out this with a negative. The worksheet itself will add your salaries, your benefits. It'll combine those to give you your gross compensation and remove federal funding to get to your net compensation. Our second practitioner is our nurse, and we're going to say our nurse had $23,000 in salaries, $2,000 in benefits, and no federal funding. And our SLP is going to have $25,000 in salaries, $3,000 in benefits, and $8,000 in federal funding. So that's just quarter 1. I'm going to copy because I actually just made it the same for all quarters. So just for ease of getting this input in, I do want to call your attention. We're in quarter 2 now. This is where we're going to start entering the number of TSPs that were in this category. So in our case, we only had 1 of each. So we're just going to go ahead and say that we had 1 of each. And we're going to copy this. I realize your salaries and benefits are not going to be this nice and even between quarters. But for our case, we're just going to go ahead and assume that the same dollars are going to be in here. And again, we'll put our 1 TSP. If you had more than 1, you'd obviously want to put more than 1. But you're just going to fill this out for all 4 quarters. So we're now in quarter 4, and we will see what happens with our worksheets. We had 5,000 here, and we had 8,000 here. So for the end of the year, once we've entered all of your data, we're going to go down, and there's going to be a bunch of grayed out cells, and this is the information for the fiscal year. So it all totals up here. So we had our psychologist, the 30,000 for the 4 quarters. We had the benefits, grosses up to 140. We remove the 20,000 in federal funding, and it leaves us with 120,000 of expenditures. And then we have $300,000 in total at this point. So I'm going to jump around just for a second to kind of show you how this flows into what is called the funding worksheet. This was B1 last year. So if you're really familiar with the CRCS, you will now recognize a change that this is now B2. And the funding worksheet requires no data input, but it is another worksheet that's going to just pull data and include everything in one place. So you can see that our salaries, our benefits, and our federal funds have pulled in. We have the net expenditures over here on the right. And so this will now total up to our $300,000. So we have our salaries in for our practitioners. And now we are going to look at our CYBHI fee schedule payments. So this only about 40 LEAs had payments for services rendered in 24-25. So if you are one of those 40 or so, you've heard that we'll be giving you a report that will include your payments by practitioner, and the detail will include the rendering practitioner names. So we'll help you kind of crosswalk between your TSP list, which is those practitioners that you are allowed to include their costs in the CRCS, and your CYBHI payment rendering practitioner to make sure that you are only putting payments in for practitioners whose costs are on the CRCS. So let's just say I had another practitioner that did CYBHI, but their costs are not on the CRCS. I'm not going to put their payments on the CRCS. So that's the key here. So this amount, we're just going to assume our psychologist had $20,000 in fee schedule payments, and you can see it just nets it out right here on this schedule. If you are one of the majority of LEAs that does not have fee schedule payments, you will just ignore this worksheet. You don't need to do anything. Your totals are going to pull in. You're not going to have anything listed in this column, and everything's going to auto-calculate. So that's one nice thing about, we moved the CYBHI fee schedule to its own worksheet. So you could essentially just ignore this tab. So I just want to show you again, because we did pull out the $20,000 in fee schedule payments. I want to show you on the funding worksheet that those fee schedule payments have now shown up here for the psychologist. And we did have $120,000 in net personnel costs, but now we're down to $100,000 in net personnel costs because we pulled out both the federal funding and the fee schedule payments. So now we are down, just kind of track everyone here, we're at $280,000 for our salaries, net of anything that we needed to pull out. Next, we're going to look at Worksheet C. Worksheet C is for other costs, and other costs are limited to the 5 that you see here on the screen. For our case here, I just assumed the nurse was the only one that was going to have other costs, and the object codes are listed here. So for all your practitioners, you can go ahead and pull up these object codes and see if you have costs that appear. But in this case, we're just going to assume our nurse had $300 in materials and supplies. So maybe they had a book on diagnosis codes that would go into materials and supplies. Then we're going to assume that they went to a couple conferences and they had some travel and conference expenditures that your LEA incurred. And then we're just going to assume that they had to pay some membership fees for their professional organization. So that will give us $2,000 in other costs for the nurse. And that's going to flow down here to the bottom to the total. And then you're going to see that we do have one element that we're going to capture on another worksheet, which is depreciation. So just before we do that, though, this $2,000 is going to flow up to our funding worksheet. And there you see it right here for the nurse. We have $2,000 in additional costs. So now we're going to move to equipment depreciation. And I have typed in that we had a hearing screening system that we had purchased for the LEA, and assigned an asset ID that's obviously fictitious, but in your system, if you have equipment that you're depreciating, it likely has an ID associated with it. So you would add that there. We're going to assume that this piece of equipment was placed into service on January 1 of 2025, so halfway through the fiscal year 24-25 period. And that it has a useful life of 5 years. And you can find useful lives. So for equipment, you see it here on the data validation note, but GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, they do publish estimated useful lives of depreciable assets. So you can get that information by kind of probably Googling, or you might have your accountants probably have the online resource there. But this equipment has to be over $5,000. Just to make this tab, you have to have equipment that's greater than $5,000, because equipment that is less than $5,000 is generally expensed, whereas if it's $5,000 or more, it's generally depreciated using a useful life. We're also going to assume that we had a depreciable cost of $6,000 for this asset, so it met that $5,000 threshold. I didn't have anything in federal funding. If we did, we would put it here. We could add the resource account code number that would identify those federal funds. And so what this column does is it's going to calculate straight line depreciation. And that basically takes the depreciable costs, divides the useful life, and gives you an amount per year that you can depreciate on a straight line basis. A couple of questions that really aren't applicable to us because this is brand new equipment, but was this asset retired in the cost report year? No, it was not. Wasn't placed out of service, so we don't need to put a month or year. We didn't take any prior period because this equipment went into service January 2025, so nothing was depreciated last year. So we are going to take half a year's worth of depreciation for this equipment. These are relatively straightforward calculations for your accounting personnel. Probably just identifying the assets is maybe the trickier part, but the straight line depreciation is all relatively straightforward. So we'll take $600 of depreciation. That's going to flow through to our worksheet C over here, and you can see we have other costs of $2,600. Now we are going to move to worksheet D, which is where you're going to put contractor costs. And in our assumptions, we have assumed that we have a social worker that we are contracting with. We are going to put their costs. They had a $30,000 total contract. The first $25,000 gets reported in Object Code 5800, and that's a SACS rule that you split the way you account for those costs. So the first 25,000 goes in 5,800, then the remaining 5,000 is going to go in 5,100. And then we decided that we'd have $10,000. We found we had federal funding for that social worker, and that this social worker did provide fee schedule. They got fee schedule payments. So they provided services to the non-IEP students, and LEA received $5,000 of payments for that contractor. If you are participating in CYBHI, you hear them use the word embedded contractor, which is what these would be. If the LEA is getting the payment, then this contractor is considered an embedded contractor, and then the LEA would report those payments on the CRCS, and they'd also report the costs associated with contracting with that practitioner. And then these last two are really just kind of reasonableness checks. So I'm not going to put them in now because it's not going to impact our calculations, but you would put, let's just say you had $80 that you paid for this social worker per hour, and you would calculate how many hours you paid. You can do that by taking your total cost and dividing it by 80 if you don't have an actual accounting. So this could be an estimate if it needs to be. So that gets us to a $15,000 contractor cost here. And then now we're going to talk about transportation. So for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to assume that this LEA contracts out for transportation. So we don't have employee transportation costs. But if you do, then you're going to obviously pull salaries, benefits, and federal funding or grant money and record that here. And you have to stick with these three job categories. So these are the only three that were approved by CMS. So those three, you'd input employee costs if you had them. But we're going to report our contracted transportation costs. And so you can see down here, these 4 lines are for contractors. There's 2 for services, line 11 here in Excel and line 13. And there's 2 for equipment, line 12 and 14. And so again, that rule about the first 25,000 of the contract goes into 5,800, and the rest of the contract goes into 5,100. And this contract was worth a total of $100,000. If you had federal funding, you would go ahead and put that in this column, and it would net out over here in those gray cells on the right. But we will say that we did not. So we have $100,000 in contracted transportation costs. And I'm not going to put the depreciation in. This LEA is only contracting for transportation, but if your LEA does have depreciation, so let's say you bought a bus, you would include your asset ID, the description of your asset, when it was placed in service, the useful life, the cost. It will calculate your straight line depreciation. And then if you took depreciation expense in a prior year, you'd want to make sure you incorporate that, and then take the actual depreciation for whatever portion of fiscal year 24-25 your asset was in service. So we're not going to do anything with depreciation for transportation. And so now we're on a worksheet again. The grayed out cells indicate it's just pulling data. We did not have any employed salaries or benefits, so that was from that E1 worksheet. That's blank. We did have contractor costs here in E2, and then we didn't have any depreciation. So if we did, obviously all those would populate, but we only had the $100,000 of depreciation. So that 100,000 of depreciation is going to be allocated using that one-way trip ratio that we put in on the allocation statistics tab, and it was 30%. And so 30,000 is the cost that flows into your reimbursement calculation. So let's go back now. We're going to go through the TSP list briefly, but before we do, you have now completed this CRCS. So now we're going to go back to worksheet A to kind of show you how the data pulls up and what the overpayment or underpayment is. So we had the psychologist, the nurse, and the SLP's costs, and then that totaled up to 282. And then we are going to look at, this is how the reimbursement calculation essentially tabulates down here on these little a through, I think it goes down to AB this year. That 282,000 gets increased by 10%, which was the indirect cost rate. So you get to take 28,200 as an allocation of indirect cost. So we add the 282 and the 28,200 to get the 310,200. So that is now our kind of basis for making some adjustments. We are going to add our depreciation that we took on the equipment, and that was half a year. So we took this $600. That totals up to 310,800. And now this is a total cost figure. This 310,800 is a total cost. We need to allocate it to direct services. And that's what the RMTS percentage is doing. It's saying out of your total cost, what percentage of that are we going to assign to direct medical services? And so that 50% brings your 310,800 down to 155,400. We're then going to add contractor costs. Contractor costs do not need to get assigned this allocation, so they get added after we do the direct medical service percentage allocation. And that brings us up to 170,400. And now we're going to assign these direct costs to the Medi-Cal program by applying your LEA's Medi-Cal enrollment ratio, or your MER. So the 170,400 gets multiplied by a 50% MER to get to 85,200. And then we had the 30,000 of transportation costs, which gets us to the 115,200. So there are a couple of inputs on worksheet A. There's 3 of them, and you can tell they're inputs because they're blank. This first one, and I'll just scroll to the top so you can see the inputs are here if you want to look at this later. So we're going to have a $100 other health coverage input, a $10,000 interim reimbursement, and a $1,200 withhold. So let's kind of go through those in order. So I'm going to put the $100 here, and most likely your LEA does not have anything to put in this cell. This would be a case where your LEA billed other health insurance and they paid you something. You billed Kaiser for a student or a set of students, and you got a check for $100. You're going to have to record that because we need to net that out of what your costs are that you could be reimbursed up to. So if you don't have any of those situations, you just leave it blank. No problem with that. And then this 115,100 is going to get allocated using how your claims broke down here, how we input the 70, the 20, and the 10%. And essentially what that's going to do is it's going to take your 115,000 and it's going to tell us what your Medi-Cal maximum reimbursable costs are. So I'll just take you through how one works so that you know this amount here, the 40,285, is 115,100 of allowable costs times 50% times 70%. So that says 70% of your claims were reimbursed at a 50% FMAP, and so you're going to get that allocation of your costs. So that happens down in these cells right here. And you can see the formulas are all listed here. So if you want to go through, you can just go ahead and look at O times P times percent of claims and run those numbers yourself. But what happens in the end is that these numbers sum up to get to Z, which is your Medi-Cal maximum reimbursable cost. And that is your cost ceiling. So that bucket analogy, that's that red line. That's the maximum that you can get from the federal government for matching of your costs. So we are going to then put in the interim reimbursement that we received, which was $10,000. And then this is your underpayment, $58,485. We will see that on the certification statement, and it is going to land up here. This is what the superintendent in this case is certifying as the amount that is owed. And then the last piece, there's two more things, and I realize we're running out of time, so I'll try to be quick. The withhold is now reconciled through the CRCS. So last year, these figures were in this column, and we think it's a little bit clearer to offset these so that you kind of understand that this is a calculation that is going to be happening on the cost report. This first column represents your maximum reimbursable cost times 2%. So that is the amount the department is withholding. They can withhold up to 5%, but this year we'll be withholding 2%. This is where you are going to input the amount you've paid in withhold already. And I think I put 1,200 above for our assumption. And so you owe still $170, Ocean Mist does. So these figures are going to be related in some way, but don't get too caught up on this. This is going to happen during the audit, the reconciliation of the payment versus how much you owe on withhold, if you do owe, or if you're refunded, how that will work. And the last thing that I want to do is show you the TSP lists and how to certify on the electronic form. So the TSP lists are on the CRCS. Obviously, those don't go into the calculation itself, but you will want to, for each of the 4 quarters, you're going to want to put the last name, first name, your LEA's job title, how that kind of crosswalks into the approved job classifications that are LEA BOP job classifications, and then to indicate whether you submitted billing for these practitioners. So in my case, I said the Ocean Mist did bill for all of these, but if not, you can go ahead and put no. You can copy information. So I think that's helpful to know because sometimes your TSPs stay consistent and you could just make some changes to each one. So if you wanted to start with one of these lists and copy it to the other tabs and just make adjustments, you can do that on the TSP list. And I did add a TSP here who became 100% federally funded after they were on the TSP list. So they were on the TSP list for this quarter, but you're not going to be, I think we wrote here, you're not going to include any cost for quarter 2. So if you need to do any reconciliation notes, and this is probably more internal so that you know who you're including costs for and who you're not out of your TSPs, you can go ahead and make those comments in the notes column. And then finally, the PDF, the certification page gets posted on the website and it's a 1-page certification. You're going to input the provider information at the top here. And then the most important part on this whole thing is that the amount that you include needs to match what you submit on your CRCS. So you will go back to your certification page and you will pull this amount and you're going to include that on your certification. If you submit a PDF with a different amount than your Excel file, then your CRCS will get rejected. That is a reason it'll get kicked back. So make sure that amount matches. You can complete the signatory information and then you should be set to submit. So hopefully this was helpful. I know we have a couple more slides, but we are almost done. And thank you for your attention. And I hope this is a smooth process for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Marna, for walking us through that. That was very helpful. I know we are out of time, but if you still have some time to stick around, I'll just try to wrap up this next section up quickly, but we are at the end here, just on to next steps. So we're just going to wrap up everything here today. And so hopefully everyone is feeling more confident after today's training and is ready to start completing the CRCS once everything is published. Here are just a few reminders as we move forward, starting with checking your LEA's allocation statistics. So first, check to ensure you are using the correct year when reporting your indirect cost rate. For the report that is due March 2nd, the LEA will use the fiscal year 2024-25 approved indirect cost rate. 2, check to make sure you are pulling the correct regional percentage when reporting your DMSP. The DMSP will be reported by region on the CRCS homepage, so confirm that you have the correct regional information in your CRCS. 3, check to ensure you use the report on the LEA BOP website for the LEA's NPI to identify the correct percentage of claims by FMAP grouping. Check your CRCS to make sure the data you input sums up to 100%. 4, check to ensure you calculated the MER correctly, along with making sure you have supporting files in the case of an audit. And remember that for fiscal year 2024-25 report that is due March 2nd, you cannot use SMOM MER data to complete your CRCS. You need to be using the output file that you received through the LABOP Move It and determine the count of students that were Medicaid enrolled and eligible for federal funding as of October 2024. Next is ensuring only allowable costs are included in the CRCS. So these include quarterly costs for practitioners listed on the TSP list, including their federal funding amounts, costs for which you have supporting documentation to prove that the practitioner provided LEA-BOP covered services during the year, and contracted costs for direct services, which you can support with services level documentation. So please note that additional claiming could result in a different interim reimbursement amount used in the cost settlement calculation. And that is the case when your LEA is still claiming for services rendered in fiscal year 24-25. Any adjustments to LEA-BOP interim claiming or CYBHI fee schedule program claiming will be handled during the CRCS audit. All materials for the CRCS will be posted on the LEA-BOP CRCS webpage. At this point, there are no materials posted, but we anticipate the fiscal year 24-25 information will start being posted in early January. So please make sure that you sign up for the LEA-BOP email notification so that you get the latest updates on when materials are being posted to the website. Once you get notified that the resources have been posted, just click on the cost and reimbursement comparison schedule, CRCS link, and that will take you to the CRCS webpage where everything will be posted under a fiscal year 2024-25 link. The webpage will include the Excel template and instructions, the 6 supporting reports, and the electronic certification form. Note that on the CRCS homepage, you will also find general resources links and a list of due dates. So a complete submission package for fiscal year 24-25 includes 4 items. 1, a completed Excel file. 2, a PDF of the electronically signed certification form that ties to the Excel file. Remember, total on the Excel file should be identical to the total on the PDF. And 3, grouping schedules or bridging documents that support the CRCS. 4, production log identifying the practitioner's billing for services during the fiscal year. The HCS will post all documents as soon as they are approved. And so please download all files that you will need to complete your CRCS by March 2nd. And this will include the template and the instructions, the online certification form, the supporting reports. And again, if the 2 additional reports are not applicable, you will not need to download these. Once you have all of the documents, you can collect cost data and complete the Excel template and gather your supporting documentation. You will also complete the electronic certification process. By March 2nd, your LEA will submit all 4 components in one email to the lea.crcs.submission@dhcs.california.gov mailbox. You will receive a confirmation receipt when your package has been accepted by DHCS. If you need an extension, you will also email this mailbox and include the reason for the extension request and the amount of time you feel is necessary to complete the submission. The HCS will need to approve extension requests, so make sure that you do this as far in advance of the due date as possible. For additional resources, please check out the LEA-BOP and CDE websites listed on this slide. If you would like more information on the CRCS and other LEA-BOP related topics, the HCS has an extensive library of trainings that you can check out. Additionally, for more information on SACS, the California School Accounting Manual, and where to locate indirect cost rates, please check out the CDE links listed on this slide. Questions on the CRCS can be sent to the LEA inbox, and any requests for due date extensions can be sent to the CRCS submissions email. So to support LEAs in completing their CRCS, the HCS will be holding check-in meetings in February. A general check-in meeting will be held February 4th, and a second check-in meeting specific to those CYBHI fee schedule program participants that will be reporting information on this year's CRCS will be held February 11th. So specific content covered during the check-in meetings will be based on questions and feedback that DHCS receives in January. So please feel free to submit any questions today into the chat or send us an email for topics you would like to discuss in February. Additionally, please sign up to our LEA BOPS email subscription list to get updates on when forms, instructions, and supporting reports will be posted onto our website. And so this concludes our training for today, the Billing Forum and Fiscal Year 2024-25 CRCS. As mentioned previously, for any additional questions that we were unable to address today, and for any future questions, please send them over to our mailbox, lea@dhcs.california.gov. And we do thank you for your time and attendance today, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'll also be inputting just the links in the chat if you guys need them. Thank you all.